Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest session for the Broadcast Sport Tech Innovation Forum. Our three speakers today all have different perspectives. Barbara Slater has had a long career at the BBC, culminating in her appointment as Director of Sport in April 2009, and she is responsible for approximately 20,000 hours of global sports coverage across radio, TV, and online each and every year. Though perhaps I don't know if you'll hit quite that number in 2020, Barbara, given some of the calculations, but we'll talk about that later on. Giles Goodwin is the head of content strategy for the Sports Channel Network, which is part of the VOD 365 group. It's an ad-funded streaming service that offers consumers sort of niche sports or niche sporting competitions via a variety of platforms, including via OTT on Freeview. Charles has disappeared from my screen at the moment, but he was here a moment ago, and I'm sure he will return. And Rob Brown is head of content at LiveScore TV. LiveScore began life as a companion service, really, in terms of scores and commentary, audio commentary. Free-to-air streaming, I think this year, Rob, with a deal with Stream AMG on the technical side and a sort of right-sharing deal with Premier Sports on the other. So we'll come back and talk about all of those things in turn. As I say, Rob, Giles, we'll come to you in a moment. Bear with us. We'll talk about your emerging businesses and your models. We're going to kick off with Barbara. I wonder, Barbara, if you can start by making the case really for why free-to-air sport is important for the BBC. You know, the corporation's under a lot of financial pressure, sports rights, it's an expensive marketplace. There's a bit of a balancing act that you face in terms of kind of value for money. Just begin by kicking off on that balancing act and what you seek to do in terms of making sport available free-to-air for licence fee payers.
Indeed, and I make no apology for being a huge advocate of free-to-air sport and the access that gives to millions of people. And can I just kind of maybe try and put that into some sort of scale? So your traditional free-to-air broadcast, I'm talking about your public service broadcasters, that's Channel 5, Channel 4, ITV, BBC cumulatively, we're responsible for about 6% of all the TV hours of sport, which I think is understandable when you think that there are many, many now dedicated sports channels. But we account for 60% of all the viewership. Now, if we lost that, then I think that would be incredibly detrimental for sport, for the sports business, for the overall ecology. And this is maybe a much trodden path around this sort of contest between free-to-air and pay. And I would argue that I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and. Because what we've also seen, I think maybe over the last 2 decades or so, is a combination of free-to-air and pay, providing for the audience and for the viewer unprecedented depth and choice. I mean, it just doesn't compare. You know, when I first entered the industry, I mean, you were trying to squeeze multiple events and multiple sports into a kind of grandstand format. And that's actually not what necessarily audiences want. So I think that there is an important balance, as you said in your question, to strike. And I think it's essential. It's why there's a listed event legislation. So I think this is widely acknowledged that balance is important and that there should be some protection of those pinnacle moments in sport that really have kind of cultural value. I mean, there are moments. Think about the World Cup final live on BBC One. That is something that people want to gather round as maybe as a family or as friends, as a community to watch. These are part of the national conversations, and it's right that they are free to air and available to all. And you know, if you're looking at the health of sport, the next generation coming through, who are they going to follow? They need role models, and you've got to see those role models to really believe in them and get to know them. So I do think that there is some very, very strong arguments, which I think are widely accepted, about the value of free-to-air. And it's interesting to now seeing some of the governing bodies and what they are doing, the way they are bundling their rights to acknowledge that there is a place, if you like, for free-to-air maybe to showcase how do you grow your fan base of the future. Actually, you want to reach out to a wider audience, because many events and sport and that kind of depth and breadth, what you're seeing through that is a lot of fragmentation. So if you want a breadth and a range of sport, you've probably got to maybe access, sometimes subscribing, maybe some of it is also free to air, a whole range of different suppliers. And again, I think that there is space and room for somewhere that is trying to be universal and offer something for everyone.
And how can the BBC play its role there? So you guys used to have a right sharing deal for F1, for example, which passed to Channel 4 with Sky. So it was Sky and the BBC on F1, and it became Channel 4. Channel 4 also got its hands on the Cricket World Cup final recently. Is the BBC still in the market for those kind of rights sharing partnership kind of deals? Is that still part of your strategy?
It absolutely is, and it has enabled us to maintain a position in a number of events where we wouldn't otherwise have done so. And I just think it's worth bearing in mind, and these are really broad figures, but if we go back to the 2012 Olympics and we look at rights inflation since that point, broadly across the industry, they've pretty much doubled. And our income is effectively been static or even gone down. So it is through those types of partnerships that we've been able to retain really quite a broad portfolio of events, including some of the crown jewels. And Formula One was a result of prioritization. You know, there will be along the way some tough choices that we have to make. And unfortunately, that's the case. But So Formula One, that was a choice, but live cricket, for example, is back on the BBC, and it's back on the BBC through effectively partnerships working with the governing body, who could see that some live free to air to drive interest to grow the game was important, and the rights were bundled accordingly. So, for example, we've got a great partnership on the Six Nations with ITV, and actually. In that case, you've got your two primary national networks, both embracing, both promoting, both amplifying, both talking about an event to, I would say, the benefit of the Six Nations. So we have partnerships both with pay. Our partnerships around the Olympics is with pay. Our partnership with the Six Nations, with the World Cup, with the Euros is with free to air. I'm going to be honest. Where it is to mutual interest and there are partnerships to be done, we will form them, because it can be to everyone's benefit, including the governing body in the event. And something like the 100, I think is really interesting, because that's definitely been seen as a way of cricket, in a way, not necessarily reinventing itself, but certainly reaching out to a whole new fan base. And I know from our discussions that we've had both with ECB and with Sky, we are all on a mission to grow that. And therefore, we're working there really collaboratively to try and make that event a real gateway, if you like, for new fans coming into the sport. And again, I think it's a really good example of the both and rather than the either or.
Yeah, that makes sense. Even to the point where my understanding is the creation of the 100, i.e. trimming 20 balls effectively off a T20 match, has been done with a TV slot in mind, right? Making that the duration of the game effectively work for a broadcaster. So there's something there perhaps that speaks to the governing bodies and the sporting organisations also understanding the need for partnership, right? Indeed,
and I don't think that's just a broadcaster issue. I think that is looking at audiences, because ultimately we're part of the kind of the journey, if you like, on an event wanting to reach the maximum number of people. So I do think we shouldn't be frightened of experimenting with new formats and seeing what really works for the audience. And so. I mean, we know that people are tending to enjoy things in slightly shorter form. We're seeing that across the piece, and that's not just sport. That's in many different areas of life. So I think trying to understand what's really going to engage your audience, what's going to keep your audience with you. So I don't think it's just a broadcaster pressure. I think it's the broadcasters and the rights holders working together to know their audience and to try and provide something that really takes the sport and grows that new fan base.
Very good. At this point, talking about partnerships, Rob, I'm going to come to you and ask a little bit about LiveScore, because your company has evolved, as I said at the beginning, from being a kind of companion service into the streaming space, and that you've done that via partnership, I believe, with Premier sort of sports. Can you talk to us a little bit, just give us a flavour about that evolution of LiveScore, what it was previously, what you're doing now, and how far sort of down that path you are?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, it's so nice to hear Barbara, perfectly articulate, free to air and why it's so important. And as huge advocates of free to air content, live streaming and VOD, I couldn't agree more with all of those points she's made. You're right, Chris. We are a companion service to our users, and we're a long-standing business. We've been around since '98. So our users know us up until this year as a scores and statistics provider. But touching on that companion reference you mentioned, for us, entering live streaming or video generally, it felt like a natural evolution for our business. We see a lot of pre-match and post-match engagement from users, but fundamentally they come in to check scores, real time. And there's always a game going on somewhere in the world, it seems, and we cover literally hundreds of thousand events from a scores and stats perspective. So in that sense, the handling of scale and the surfacing of video content, as I say, just felt like a natural evolution. So we were at the turn of the year, we took the decision to move into video. And we had a set of rights put in front of us, which were very nicely curated by Saran Media, and some of those rights are put together through sub-licensing from Premier Sports, so via IMG as well. And the rights we put forward were, I'd say, almost perfectly aligned with user appetite in the UK and Ireland. We're very fortunate that we've got a large-scale audience, and with that comes a lot of interest and insight into what users are already interested in. So what competitions, which are their most followed teams, etc. So we already knew that, or we had everything crossed, but we were very hopeful that even before launching, the content we were going to launch with was going to drive strong interest. And I think it's fair to say that Serie A is our flagship competition in the UK and Ireland, and that is reflected and was reflected before we launched through our insight. And we're very early into our journey, so we have our eyes wide open. We're really excited to be in this space. We recognise we're a new entrant, so we've got a lot of learning to do. We want to observe all the great work that's being done across the industry, and then hopefully evolve our product so that in line with really users' expectation. And it's great to get the feedback we've already been getting from users. I guess we're trying to work through the gears, and the steps we do take, we're trying to do the right things in the right way.
But I mean, you've got some relatively prestigious content in the sense, like you say, you mentioned Serie A. I mean, outside of the Premier rights, sort of popular football leagues around Europe. Was that? I think you may have mentioned it. It chimed with the data you already had about what your users were interested in. You've decided to put football, it seems to me, front and centre of this move into streaming as a very mainstream sport, but perhaps from a UK perspective, slightly secondary kind of leagues. Is that? I don't know if that is a fair summation.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, we assessed what was available, and as we all know, these things move in cycles. So, the content that we've acquired was at the time what was available, but we're already now having conversations with other rights holders around how we can help with the distribution of their content. We're very fortunate we have users in every country around the world, and our viewpoint really, going back to Barbara's point, this isn't just about, free to air isn't just to the benefit of consumers, it's to the benefit of rights holders. And, our position in this space to enable the distribution of content we hope will work for both the consumers and the rights holders. So we have started with football because that's predominantly why users use our service. However, most of us enjoy more than one sport, and so this goes back to really just taking one step at a time. We're already having conversations with other sports rights holders. I'd hope and expect at some point in the future we will be surfacing content from sport other than football. But it felt like a natural start point for us, given that's where most of our users' interests lie.
Yeah. And what about driving awareness then of both your service and the fact that you've moved into streaming? There's a lot of rival sports services. There's a lot of content out there of every single kind. So how are you able to sort of fight your corner a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back really to be honest, we're figuring it out as we go. We are very lucky in terms of the scale of our audience. We haven't really done any above the line marketing or promotion of our service. Yet we're already into the many hundreds of thousands of viewers who have already watched the game. So I think really we're first and foremost we're providing a service to our existing users, and we're definitely seeing trends which show that from a user level we're definitely trending upwards. So it's even without promotion. We're relying really on our user base to do a lot of the promotion for us, and that seems to be working. But
sure,
there's no doubt in the future we will absolutely be looking at marketing opportunities to drive greater awareness. But as a kind of a product owner really of this area, I'm very keen to ensure that we have all our ducks in a row in terms of the product, the content offering, before we start to elevate our marketing.
That makes sense. And just finally, before I come to you, Giles, but finally, Rob, what about can you talk us through your business model a little bit? And what does success look like? I presume there's some sort of revenue share, but talk to me a little about what your business model is and what you're trying to achieve from a commercial perspective.
Yeah, sure. So I think in terms of the model within this area, we're very flexible. We're looking at a range of different commercial scenarios with partners. So there won't be a one size fits all. But in terms of our general strategy, we've always been an ad funded business, and because we have that existing user base, we can almost instantly start to monetize content by surfacing in our app and eventually in our website. So whilst we only introduced pre-roll advertising the weekend just gone, we've actually been generating additional revenue through the video content over the last few months, just through the additional traffic that we've been driving and the increased dwell time we've seen from users. So first and foremost, we're a free-to-air model, and we're going to be, that will be our approach in the long term. Where we go in terms of value we add back to rights owners and rights holders, we're very open-minded about that. We have paid for a set of rights, but equally, we're having discussions with other rights holders around potential revenue share partnership, or the insight I've described a moment ago, how we can offer back that as some kind of value, so that a rights owner who's looking for additional penetration in a particular market, we can give them the insight into where they currently rank, and through the distribution via our platform, how we can help increase that.
Very good. That's interesting. Thank you, Rob. Giles, I'm going to come to you and talk about this about the Sports Channel network.
Sure.
It seems built on highlights, on full coverage of events, but maybe with a slight kind of delay, some documentaries, and you're really quite strong in sort of niche sports as well. Is that a fair summation? Could you give us a sort of flavour of the Sports Channel network?
Yeah, of course, Chris. Thanks very much. Obviously, the Sports Channel network was part of a business called VOD 365, which runs and owns 3 other channels, 2 kids channels and a documentaries channel. So the business is predicated on-demand premium content, working with premium content partners to host content, both highlights, features, documentaries, stuff that has a longevity. So as we know, highlights drop off very, very quickly as the new events happen. So what we've tried to build is a platform where, similar to a Netflix or an Amazon, where you can come and watch content at any time you want, across 11 categories of content, across, at the moment, Freeview and YouView. We have a linear channel on Samsung TV Plus, but eventually across some of the other platforms as well, like the Apple TVs and Roku. But at the moment, we are a free-to-air. So we try and provide a frictionless service. So we are ad funded. So we are an IP delivered platform or service. So even though we sit on Freeview and YouView, we deliver everything via IP, which gives us a huge amount of data on our audience. No one registers to consume the content, but through IP, we obviously, each individual address, we know what they're consuming, when they're consuming it, what the drop off is in terms of the programming. So that all that information is available back to the content owner. And if you're a production company, for example, like a partner like Sunset and Vine, who have branded content like Mobo Won the Grid or something like that, we can tell them this is when your content is consumed, this is the reach, this is the audience, this is the revenue, and hopefully they may use that in their future productions. So there are, we don't need to convince rights holders to say we are complementary. We've never been live, we won't be live, because we don't feel, as Rob and what Barbara just said, we don't feel that we have the ability to play in that space. But what we do have is, to your point, there is so much content out there, both at the premium level and at the, I'll take your phrase, niche sport, where there is so much content being created because the cost of production is decreasing, as we all know. And so there is much more content available and many more outlets for that outside of the YouTubes and the Facebooks, where we could, when I go to the market and I speak to content owners or federations or events, we are free to air first and foremost. We're only in the UK. We have a human sales team as opposed to programmatic ad sales. So we've managed to, through Google DFP, deliver ads onto these platforms, and we have 100% fill rate at high CPMs. So we're able to monetize content very, very effectively. And even though some people don't like the thought of having to consume content with ads around it, that's just what commercial television is. So we're all sort of fairly used to it. So the ability for us to work across big sports, the motorsports and the cyclings, and then into the quirky sports. I mean, things that work well for us are things like karting, go-karting, FIA karting, or drone racing, and then into things like wrestling, and then fishing, which I know is a huge sport, a passion-based sport. So we have sports which, wouldn't traditionally be on Barbara's platform or Rob's platform, but there are pockets of audience in the UK who would consume this content all day long.
I think that's really interesting. I think perhaps when I said niche sports earlier, maybe I was being a touch unfair. I've written down extreme sports, sailing, wrestling, these things which have incredibly passionate fan bases, right? But where with the best one in the world, they don't have mainstream exposure on the biggest platforms. And so presumably you're able to, if you can have specific analytics, you're able to monetize that quite effectively through a potentially small but a potentially highly engaged audience. Is that's the model? That's presumably
absolutely correct. So each of the sports you've mentioned have course commercial partners within them. Let's take our relationship with ASO in France, who have a number of cycling races, motor races, and now recently the Vendée Globe. If you watch that content, they're not quite NASCAR drivers, but there's a huge amount of commercial partners. And our partnership with ASO is we will put all of your content you provide us onto a free-to-air platform, and we'll promote that content around the event both on our platform and on our nascent social channels, and allow you to report back to the teams, the sports, whatever it may be, or the event providers, that this content is freely available on this platform. And these are the numbers. We're not Barb rated. We're not like an ITV. We have very, very direct data, and it is IP household data. So I don't know that Giles Goodwin is watching the content, but I know somebody who lives in this IP is watching it, and we infer this person who likes sailing and tennis and golf. So we can take that sort of information to the advertisers and the media agencies, and talk about long-term commercial partnerships. But things like boxing for us and fight sports, MMA, wrestling, that worked well for us, and we've seen the growth of those sports over the last number of years.
And Giles, what's the value for you guys, either commercially or strategically, about, I know you're an OTT service, but being available via Freeview, as opposed to I mean, I know you have these things as well, but you've got that decision. You're available via Freeview. You could be an app. You could be a website. There's something about being on Freeview via the OTT platform. What's in it for you on that front?
Well, firstly, it's extremely expensive to be on Freeview and YouView in HD. So that, you have to factor in the cost of being on these platforms. The flip to us is that we provide a premium service to Freeview as a channel that is nationally available, freely nationally available, and we have a good relationship with and they promote us because they know that in terms of the content partners we bring to their platform, but also the fact that we are we're a commercial entity, so they share in the benefit of what we do.
Okay, good. And you mentioned at the beginning you're part of a wider group, VOD 365.
Yeah.
Is that, have you learned things? I mean, you have Catch Up, for example, quite a well-known kids channel. Have you learned things from your other partner channels within the group that you're then applying to SCN, or what about that sort of that working, operating as a group in that way?
I don't work across the kids channels. I also look after the channel strategy or content strategy for a documentary channel called Planet Knowledge, which is again a documentary channel which has probably 20 different categories of content, and so I take my learnings from sport into the documentary space, which that world is just 50 times as bigger than sport, and understanding relevance and interest. That's the thing that drives my decision making on SCN, but also drives my decision making on Planet Knowledge, is what is relevant, what's interesting, both for the advertising community we deal with, for consumers, but also for the owners of the platforms and the channels. Into the kids stuff, as you say, Catch Up is now a very, very well-known brand, and a brand in itself, which has commercial spin-offs, merchandising, etc., and working much, much more closely with the content owners into their merchandising licensing. So there's a spin-off in that kids section, but the learnings really are finding what works, accessing as much of that as possible, but also sharing in the promotion with the content owner, where we work with a huge number of content partners who some just give us the content, say, right, it's yours, you market it, you host it, you cover the cost of all of that, as opposed to others where they contribute to that marketing, that promotion. And that's for us the best commercial partnership we possibly have.
Very good. Okay. I'm just checking the time. I'd like to leave a little bit of time for Q&A at the end from the audience. We've got a couple of questions coming in. Do keep submitting those via the chat functionality, and I'll put them to the panelists. Barbara, before we move on to Q&A, I'm going to jump back to you at this point. We've got a busy 2021 coming up now with a delayed Summer Olympics, a delayed Euro football tournament, and actually you were saying to me the run of sport now all the way through 2022 is pretty. This is going to be coming out of 2020 with all the things that have gone on this year. It's going to be a very incredibly busy time for BBC Sport. So what will be your priorities? How are you gearing up for the challenges ahead?
Well, I think one of the big issues is trying to plan with COVID and the uncertainty that COVID, it puts on all of us. And in many ways, we've sort of ripped up the production manual, if you like, over this period of time to find ingenious new ways of covering, commentators covering events and doing commentary from their homes, different commentaries in different homes, all looked up by technology. I actually think what the industry has delivered has been extraordinary when you think about the restrictions and how innovative all sorts of different sections have been, the rights holders for sure, and the broadcasters as well. So I think a lot will flow from that evolution of what happens. I mean, I think it was the World Snooker. They had a crowd in on day one, no crowd in on day two, and then they were back to having a small crowd in on the finals. So it's that kind of adaptability, and we're trying to build that into our planning model. I mean, I think there is a sense of utter determination from some of the governing bodies and the rights holders that those events will happen. So I'm now talking about the Euros and I'm talking about the Olympics, but we just don't know what COVID holds around the corner. But I think we're right to be optimistic that we will start to see more of a return to normal. And obviously we've got events bumped from 2020 into 21, and therefore events from 21 bumped into 22. But it really is quite a run when you think about it. We have a European Football Championships, Men's European Football Championships. We have the Olympics from Tokyo. Then we're moving into then a Winter Olympics. We're moving into a Commonwealth Games that is being hosted here in the UK in Birmingham. That can be fantastic if you look back at the success of Glasgow. Then the Women's European Football Championship also comes to the UK. And if you think of what a springboard last summer's Women's World Cup was, imagine how much even greater the impact can be from the Women's Euros in 22. And then, of course, we have a Winter a World Cup and a Men's World Cup. So, I mean, that is really quite some run. And, of course, all of those events available free to air. And I just think that contributes so much to the industry. It just keeps sport right up there, up front and centre. And I think everyone benefits from that. Our audiences benefit from that. I think the sports industry benefits from that. And I think the interesting thing about many of those events is you might describe them as pinnacle events. Some of them are listed. And again, I would just go back. It's not either or. It's kind of both and I think that kind of exposure for free to air is healthy for sport in the UK.
Mm. And Barbara, from a production point of view, you talked about the impact of COVID this year. Sport was already edging and exploring remote production.
Yes.
That's been a move towards that. There's obviously been more remote production in 2020. Would you consider that some of the trends that were already happening, we might see an acceleration of from a technical point of view because of COVID?
You're absolutely right. I think it has accelerated that. And therefore, we've probably done things where we might have been slow. We've been forced to act quickly. Actually, some of that's been extremely successful. So I'm absolutely sure that that's going to be continue. And I think the interesting thing as well is quite how much sustainability is also coming up the agenda. And actually, a lot of these new production methods, in the end, will be more sustainable. And that's a really important and a growing element, I think, that the industry needs to consider. So you're absolutely right. It is a trend that will continue, and that doesn't mean that you still can't have on-site presence. It's just some of the infrastructure you're taking, because what we've also learned is that audiences love to get a feel and a sense of the event. It is important to capture that atmosphere. And again, I think these are premium events. They're events people invest a lot of their time in. So if we're doing, the World Cup from Russia, it's absolutely right that we're reflecting that. And I'm thinking back to that amazing studio looking over Red Square. It was a really important part of the presentation and of the atmosphere that we were creating. But some of that infrastructure can be back in the UK.
Good, that makes sense. And before I go to Q&A, I'm going to come first to you, Rob, and then to you, Giles. I asked Barbara about 2021 for your businesses. What are your ambitions for 2021? Rob, if you could sort of kick off, what are the things that you think actually this is what we're looking to achieve next year? These are the markers. These are the sort of markers of progress that we're hoping to see along the way.
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, as a fairly new service, having relaunched 5 months ago, every month really is kind of a progress for us. So it is quite difficult for us to plan too far ahead, because ultimately looking to progress week over week. So for us, it's going to be between probably now and the next 6 months. It's about maximising the value of the rights that we already have at our disposal. Surfacing them in as intuitive a way as possible for our users. That's both on a live and on a VOD level. And then as we head towards the spring summertime, we'll hopefully be by then looking at next season and what we've got in store in terms of rights generally. The rights that we have today, most of them are for this season only. So. Interesting, situation at the moment where we're trying to make as much value out of the rights that we have today, but we've also got one eye on next season and where we want to take the overall service for our users.
Good. You're going to be a busy man out having some conversations with some partner broadcasters and maybe some rights holders as well. Sounds like you'll be busy in 2021. And Giles, how about you? What does success look like? What are the markers of progress along the way for Sports Channel Network?
I think for us, the ability to get onto multiple platforms. So I talked about Roku and Android TV, Apple TV, etc. Those platforms. So you widen your audience, the free-to-air audience I was talking about. International is another area for us. We're exploring the ability to take the channels plural, not just SEM, but the channels into new markets where, again, connectivity is strong and there's a strong advertising-based marketplace. And then commercial partnerships. Again, we've been around for 3 years, and we've worked with certainly some of our content partners for well over 2.5 to 3 years. So it's for us going and deepening the relationships with commercial partners that we've begun to have a relationship with.
Very good. Okay, let's take some questions from the audience. I've got a number here that we'll rattle off. We've got 5 minutes to go. Barbara, I know that you won't want to talk commercial specifics, but a question from Alex McGovern is: how important is it to the BBC to maintain a foothold in the Premier League through Match of the Day?
Oh, I think Match of the Day is sort of essential, but for viewers. And I think what's interesting is if you actually look at the share of those who follow the Premier League, how many of those actually only can access that through the BBC, because obviously not everybody can afford subscriptions, and it's something like 60% of the audience. And I think it was also interesting that in this crisis, we also saw a kind of desire, a very strong desire and a lot of pressure on some of that football that we saw played during COVID and Project Restart being available free to air. And I just think that says, it almost amplifies the fact that there is a value in that. And I think it's really important. And I think we have a part to play, and that is to take nothing away from the coverage, the excellent coverage that takes place elsewhere, but to have that weekly catch up, roundup, that access point for, in a way, what is actually the majority of the audience is crucial, I think, for all parties.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. There's another question for you here, Barbara, about niche sports, more niche sports coming into the Olympics. This is a question from Elspeth Yates asking about more niche sports coming into the Olympics. How you judge what sports are kind of worthy of purchasing rights or exploring in a wider sort of space, putting money into purchasing rights in those sorts of areas. What would be your sort of guiding principles from that perspective?
Well, what's really interesting is I think we saw a step change, actually sparked by 2012 Olympics, and for the first time, all of those multiple feeds, if you remember, being available, and actually almost streaming coming to the fore. And now you see that incredibly widespread, obviously. And that is a capability that we now, as well as other platforms. And the interesting thing is we work with governing bodies, and one of the things they say to us is, how do we get oxygen to our events? And we make those streaming platforms available. Now, we're not looking necessarily always to do that exclusively. We don't want to, our mission, if you like, is to the widest possible audience to reach sport. So again, I would say that we can be complementary to governing bodies that maybe want to run almost a direct-to-consumer service themselves, or actually other streaming services. It's can we be a shop window that grows interest, and actually grows interest for people to dig deeper? Just thinking of Rob's service. I mean, if you go and look, it's absolutely extraordinary, the depth and the detail that is offered for global football. And there are some fans that will want that. And that's the kind of thing that the BBC could never provide. We imagine trying to do that across every sport and the breadth of range of things that we do. So again, I think that there is a role for many different players, if you like, in this broadcast sports industry.
Very good. And finally, we're just coming through to the final moments of the session. For Rob and Giles, there's a final question here from Claire Downey. The question is both sides of the argument, but I'm going to ask you guys, Rob and Giles. It's about the relationship between new emerging players and established broadcasters in terms of, are they competitors? Are they collaborators? What's that relationship and how does it work?
From our perspective, we offer our platform as a partnership. So if a content partner wants to promote another service which is not competing with us, such as a YouTube channel or an app or a pay-per-view service, we are there to help them support and grow that choice of where they want the user to go. We obviously offer a free platform. If they want to drive them elsewhere, which is not competitive to STN, we are more than comfortable with that.
Bob, I hope that you're there. From your point of view, I guess partnerships with existing broadcasters is really important.
100%, yeah, and not least because we're fascinated about learning from all of the different services in the market, both long-standing and newer services. So no, absolutely, collaboration in this space is crucial. And so we're very happy to share ideas, and similarly to how Barbara and Giles have described, we're not precious in any way in terms of whether we surface content on a exclusive or non-exclusive basis. Our ambition really is to put as much quality content in front of our users as possible.
Very good. Listen, time has defeated us. Rob, Giles, Barbara, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the questions from the audience. That's it. If there was an audience that we could hear, we'd have a round of applause. But many thanks to the three speakers. We really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the forum. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.